the first episode of Drone Mythbusters in Australia. Here I'll be exploring the top 5 drone myths and misconceptions where you can fly in Australia. Myth number 1. You are not permitted to fly within 3 nautical miles, 5.5 kilometres of an airport or helipad. This is incorrect and was clearly written in CASA's Rules and Regulations Handbook, but it was so often reported and CASA was getting sick of it, they needed to clarify a few months ago that it is perfectly legal to fly within 3 nautical miles of an airport, provided you follow the other rules and regulations. Myth number 2, you're not permitted to fly over 120 metres in altitude. CASA clearly states that the 120 metre altitude limit is purely for controlled airspace, which they then define as most cities. A lot of people look at the do not fly apps and say, oh, I'm not allowed to fly anywhere in Australia. Well, a good bet is those circular do not fly maps merely show the 120 metre restriction rather than where you're not actually allowed to fly. Myth number 3. Flying FPV is perfectly legal in Australia as long as you have a spotter on your bird at all times. This is wrong. In Australia, as per CASA's rules, you're not permitted to fly FPV at all. In fact, the rules clearly state that the spotter is the one that is allowed to have the FPV goggles. The pilot must have eyes on the craft at all times. There are clubs in Australia who operate on private land who are permitted to fly FPV as a pilot. That being said, there has not been a single instance in Australia of a pilot flying FPV and being fined by CASA. Relate to national parks and wildlife. Pops up every few months. The myth being that you are not allowed to fly over a national park. The actual rules from CASA, which controls the airspace above a national park, do not restrict any airspace over a national park. A national park has restrictions over aircraft landing and taking off from a national park, which they lump drones into. National Park Services classifies a drone as an aircraft, and they can restrict drones from taking off and landing in the national park. However, there is no restriction to flying over a national park. Myth number 5. You are not permitted to fly within 300 metres of marine wildlife. This is a 20-year-old rule, dated well before drones were actually a thing, and clearly relates to manned aircraft. The fact of the matter is, drones are actively used every day to study and track